The 2003 Ninja Turtles cartoon introduced many new characters and concepts into the franchise, some in very iconic ways. Hun stands out as one of these memorable additions. As the Shredder's right-hand man, he was known for his brute force and hulking figure, obediently following his master's commands. However, his loyalty had its limits. When the time came, he betrayed the Foot Clan and sought to surpass it by creating a stronger rival organization. Today, I will delve into the 4Kids version of Hun. Hun, initially referred to as The Hun, was created by Lloyd Goldfine with creative input from Peter Laird. This nickname, evoking Attila the Hun, a formidable leader at the dawn of the Middle Ages, hinted at a menacing figure. While his nickname gave hints at a menacing figure, not much was defined about the character during the first drafts. He was considered to be Hispanic at one point and then changed to Slavic. However, the lack of a name didn't sit well with Peter, and several names were proposed by the team, such as Sledge, Diesel, Cruel, Grief, Machete, Shiv, Mace, and Rage. Peter didn't like any of these and even suggested Shun. I'm unsure when they gave up, but they changed him from The Hun to just Hun, and that was how the character came to be. Another important characteristic was added by Peter Laird, who suggested adding him as a member of the Purple Dragons in his backstory. Hun was played by Greg Carey for most of the show's run, with David Zen Mansley stepping in for him on a few occasions. Hun's early steps were never properly defined, but there are some things that we know for sure. When Hun was young, he ran a protection racket with the Purple Dragons. One of their victims was Arnold Jones Sr., that is, Casey Jones's father. When he refused to pay for protection, Hun and the Purple Dragons torched his store. Despite being warned against going to the police, Arnold decided that reporting them was the right thing to do. It was then implied that his decision to go to the police was likely what led to his death. This event traumatized Casey Jones, pushing him down the road of vigilantism to take down the Purple Dragons and, over the years, become a real thorn in their side. Of course, it's hard to mention the character's origins without getting into a story point so dark that it resulted in an episode getting cancelled. I'm talking, of course, about the possibility of Hun having a twin brother. In 2004, Steve Murphy wrote a children's book where Mikey and Raph joined an amateur wrestling competition, where they went against Hun and his twin brother, Arnold. While Steve Murphy was part of the Mirage staff and often wrote for the show, it's hard to consider this book canon. However, that wouldn't be the only time Hun would be considered to have a twin brother. I'll review the unproduced 5th season episode that tackles this family matter later in the video. When the Foot Clan arrived in New York City, instead of competing against the local gangs, they offered to include them in their criminal network. This was a great opportunity for the Purple Dragons, and thanks to this association, Shredder discovered Hun. Perhaps because of his brute force and great admiration for him, Shredder took him as his right-hand man. But being promoted into the Foot Clan meant that Hun didn't have time to deal with the Purple Dragons on a daily basis, and he delegated his role to other members, like Dragonface. Why was Hun so loyal to the Shredder? It was never explored, but I'll share my theories later in the video. It was while working for the Shredder that the location of Hamato Yoshi was discovered, and Shredder sent Hun and some ninjas to extract information about the Utrom's whereabouts under torture. But Yoshi refused to talk, and realizing the exercise was futile, Shredder ordered Hun to kill Yoshi. Splinter, who was just a pet rat back then, tried to defend his master by scratching Hun's face. While Hun was able to throw Splinter out the window, the scratch left a permanent scar on the side of Hun's face. By the time Splinter climbed back up, Shredder had killed Master Yoshi. Hun remained loyal to the Shredder throughout the years, no matter how gruesome his assignments were, like any time the Shredder asked Hun to punish Baxter Stockman. But the Foot Clan would get challenged by the Turtles. Hun could fight against them quite effectively, but in the end, he would be no match for the whole family. But the Turtles were only part of his problems. Casey Jones's vendetta against the Purple Dragons continued. but Hun never perceived Casey as more than a persistent annoyance. He knew who was behind the mask, but unless he was provoked, he wouldn't go out of his way to kill Casey. That is, unless it was an order from the Shredder. And notice that I say the Shredder and not the Foot Clan. Hun had no loyalty to anyone but the Shredder. When he was assumed dead, the mob, the clan, and the Purple Dragons went to war to take control of the remains of the Shredder's criminal empire. To do this, he had to take down Dragonface to regain the respect of the Purple Dragons. And once in control, he made his intentions clear that he wanted to make the Purple Dragons the next big criminal organization in the city. Karai came to New York to bring peace by disguising herself as the Shredder. Once Hun saw the Shredder was back, he led the Dragons to ally themselves with the clan again. This made the Dragons very uncomfortable, and they started fighting each other. During the fight, Hun discovered that Shredder was really Karai, to whom he had no loyalty whatsoever. He then decided to side with the rogue Foot Elite and tried to kill her, but he failed. But things changed, as the Shredder was still alive and recovering. It's not clear who approached who first, but Shredder probably gave the order to bring back Hun to the fold, and Hun, always loyal to him, came back. As a welcome back gift, Hun mutilated Baxter even more, transforming him into just a floating brain with one eye. Unfortunately, things were changing against Hun. The more he continued to fail on his missions against the Turtles, the more he ended up on the Shredder's bad side. As Shredder stopped trusting both Hun and Baxter, they formed an uneasy alliance. Baxter and Hun were sent on a suicide mission, so they joined forces to eliminate his immediate rivals, Dr. Chaplin and Karai, and return to the good side of the Shredder. Unfortunately, they were found out, and Shredder punished them with forced work. Still, there was a big difference in how Baxter and Hun dealt with failure. Baxter often blamed others, while Hun would always admit his mistakes, mostly out of his respect for his master. Shredder gave Hun a final opportunity to redeem himself by sending him to recover Karai alive from the hands of Agent Bishop. Despite wanting her dead, Hun tried all he could to bring her back. But Baxter, trying to look better than Hun, attempted to sabotage the mission by impersonating Hun and tipping the Turtles about Hun's location at Agent Bishop's warehouse. This resulted in Hun's favor, as the Turtles helped him rescue Karai. Although the 6 of them couldn't take down Agent Bishop. Have I told you how skilled this character was? But as I mentioned earlier in this video, Hun's loyalty had a tipping point. During the final fight between the Turtles and Shredder, Hun found out that his master was an Utrom. He didn't have much time to deal with this revelation, as Leatherhead pushed him down an abyss, which he survived. But you'd be surprised to know that this dramatic plot point almost didn't happen. Lloyd Goldfine and Peter Laird had different opinions on what Hun's reaction should have been, or even if it should have happened at that particular moment. Lloyd thought Hun would have remained loyal to the Shredder even after knowing he was a Utrom. This was already explored in a future timeline story I'll discuss later. So to him, Hun's loyalty had no limits. But for Peter, Hun should have felt freaked out and betrayed. And it's not just because he was an Utrom, but because they were fighting and hunting the Utroms all along. This revealed that the cause they were following was all just a lie. Not knowing what his reaction should have been almost left the moment out of the script. But Peter pressured Lloyd on including it, as dramatically speaking, it was the best moment to deal with it, and not in the following season, way after the Shredder was gone. According to Peter, this was Hun's perfect opportunity to grow as a character. Having lost all his respect for his master, Hun left the clan, and used all the knowledge he learned with them to build up the Purple Dragons into a serious criminal enterprise. Hiding in plain sight, their main activity was now high-tech robberies and trade. I mentioned earlier that an unproduced episode of the 5th season dealt with Hun's twin brother. To be fair, the story wasn't about this, at least not at first. In the initial outline, this was an episode about the origin of Garbage Man, and Hun was going to be in it. Garbage Man was a minor villain who kidnapped homeless people to make them work for him on a landfill island. I'll make a video about him some other day. In any case, while reading the outline for the episode, Peter Laird thought it would be a neat idea to make Hun and Garbage Man brothers, as they already resembled each other. Furthermore, this would have been the perfect opportunity to explore their origin story. Peter provided more suggestions about the relationship between the two brothers. Garbage Man would have been Hun's younger brother, and he would have had a disability of some kind. He even suggested that perhaps this disability was caused by something Hun did. This would have motivated Hun to work for the Shredder to get his hands on the technology his brother needed to overcome his disability. Or at least until something went horribly wrong, giving birth to the Garbage Man as we knew him. The writers felt like this was worth exploring, but they made it even creepier, making them conjoined twin brothers. According to the final revision of the script, a young Hun hired a shady doctor to separate them. After the surgery, he left his twin behind, thinking he had no chance of survival. But the doctor kept the brother and performed experiments, turning him into the Garbage Man. The episode was stopped in the early stages of production, as it was considered too dark for kids' programming. This story was never fully produced, and as a result, its place in the show's canon is debatable. Hun returned later as the Turtles recruited help against the one true Shredder. Hun, representing the Purple Dragons, wasn't convinced that this was his fight, as he had no relationship with this Tengu Shredder. But the Turtles convinced him by telling him that this Shredder was also furious at those who worked with the Utram Shredder. Hun agreed, but was, for the most part, useless against him. At some point, he discovered a supernatural treasure that he tried to steal until everything returned to normal following the death of the one true Shredder. This let us know what Hun's priorities were. In the middle of what looked like the end of the world, he was more interested in doing crime and getting richer. The Turtles disappeared for a whole year, and Hun took advantage of this and told his people that it was him who killed them off. He even went to the extreme of using their weapons as trophies, something that would blow up in his face upon the Turtles' return. But Hun had more significant problems to deal with. The rumor on the streets was that the Shredder was returning, and if this was indeed true, he would probably get revenge on him for his betrayal. To be prepared for this, he ordered his goons to steal the powerful Ring of Yin, to be able to create monsters to defend him, even though this would transform him into a monster as well. Unfortunately, the ring was now April's engagement ring, and it was transforming her into a monster. Hun was determined to cut April's finger to get the ring, but Casey Jones saved the day in the end, and Hun lost the battle. Both being against the Foot Clan, Baxter and Hun made a strategic alliance yet again, this time around to steal resources from the Foot Clan's secret vaults. This would help them upgrade their technology, and in exchange, Baxter could work on a new cyborg body. Cyber Shredder was not happy with these two stealing from him. When he realized that Baxter was using a cybernetic body, he hacked his body and jumped into the physical world. If you're lost about what I just said, check out my video about all the Shredders in TMNT 2003. Cyber Shredder inside of a hacked Stockman was now accusing Hun of being a traitor. They fought each other, but in the middle of the battle, Baxter ejected from his own body, and with the help of the Turtles, they severed the connection between the body and the Cyber Shredder. Later that season, we learned about another side of Hun. He played RPG Online under the name of Elfinator, and unknowingly helped the Turtles recover another data bit of Master Splinter. If you're lost about what I just said again, check out my video about Splinter in TMNT 2003. While playing, Hun was interrupted by a purple dragon. Hun admitted to being a hardcore gamer, and threatened to rip his tongue out if he told anyone. Hun's worst fears came true after the Shredder escaped the virtual world. Before taking over the city, he had his revenge against the purple dragons and Hun, whom he defeated. But there are reasons to believe that, had the show continued, Hun would have played a significant role. The 7th season started with a sneak peek at a future war between the three Shredders. At some point, while reviewing the scripts for the season, Peter Laird came up with the idea of Hun taking over the Shredder armor to rebuild the foot. This would have made one of those three Shredders Hun instead. But keep in mind that this wasn't the first time Peter Laird wanted Hun to become the Shredder. He also considered it for the 4th and 5th seasons after Shirel was written out. Knowing that he would have needed to fight Karai for the title, he even called it Battle of the Shredders. Hun played an interesting role in the Turtles Forever movie. While the Purple Dragons were stealing some high-tech supplies, they got ambushed by the 1980s Turtles. This didn't go as expected, and the Dragons took the Turtles hostage, not knowing it wasn't the regular Turtles they usually fought against. Hun was surprised to see these Turtles, but even more so after discovering the mutagen. After a Purple Dragon was mutated in the fight against the 2003 Turtles, Hun decided that he needed to get his hands on this mysterious substance. But when he finally got his hands on it, he was accidentally mutated into what he hated the most in the world: a turtle. It may have been the writer's idea, but just in case, Peter Laird suggested transforming Hun into either Toka or Slash while still making him recognizable. This was achieved because of the shape of the Purple Dragon's belt buckle that resembled an inverted S, a known characteristic of Slash. Also, both Toka and Razor appeared in the movie, albeit unnamed. Curiously enough, this wasn't the first time Peter considered mutating Hun. He was almost mutated into an insect creature during the mutant outbreak of Season 4. In any case, Hun crossed paths with the Technodrome, meeting his former master face to face. The two saw in each other a vehicle for their revenge, and Shredder accepted Hun back into the fold. He then sent him to track the Turtles down, and with the help of the nose device, they invaded the lair and pushed the Turtles to escape to the 1980s dimension. Nevertheless, Hun captured Splinter, who served as bait to capture all the Turtles. The Turtles were indeed captured, but thanks to Karai, they made it out alive. With very little time to prevent the end of their universe, they invaded the Purple Dragon's building to use some of the technology they stole earlier. Hun attacked them once again, still angry about his mutation. But once he saw his reality being erased in front of his eyes, Hun decided to collaborate and let the Turtles escape with a technology that could help them stop the Shredder. This was an interesting decision for someone who just took a step back. His temporary alliance with the Shredder wasn't as important as his world. Now, that was the last time that we officially saw Hun. This leaves us with the question of whether he turned back to human. Peter Laird didn't think that the change would have been permanent, whether it was because of the nature of this mutagen or because it would have been undone for other reasons. But if you like fan-made projects, perhaps you'd be interested in reading the still ongoing TMNT Shredder Wars miniseries. A mutated Hun is a key character in it, and he's trying to turn back into a human. If you've been paying attention so far, you may remember that I briefly mentioned a future timeline where Hun was still loyal to the Shredder, despite knowing that he was a neutron. That happened in the classic episode Same as It Never Was, when Donatello was sent 30 years into the future, into a 1984-esque world ruled by the Shredder, who was still attempting to return to his home world to get his revenge on the Utroms. In this reality, the leader of the Resistance was April O'Neil, in a scene that may or may not have influenced some story elements of The Last Ronin. To Donatello's surprise, Hun and Baxter were a part of this resistance, but in a very twisted way. Apparently, Shredder's patience for Hun ran out at some point, and over time he punished him by putting him in a wheelchair and attaching Baxter's brain on his shoulder, like a conjoined brother, if I may say. But Hun was scheduled to be executed after all, and April saved his life. That was 5 years before, but Hun would have preferred to have been put out of his misery. In a shocking moment during their final attack on the Shredder, Hun rushed outside of the tunneler and, against Baxter's protests, begged the Shredder to take him back. Shredder then crushed them with his exosuit. I'll cover this story in a future video. Hun's motivations are elusive, partly because he never had a definitive origin story. His journey from unwavering loyalty to Shredder to eventually betraying him and seeking to usurp his power over the city is compelling. It seems that Hun's ultimate goal was to replace Shredder, a goal realized only after learning from him. With that in mind, perhaps Hun was always respectful and loyal to the Shredder because he wanted to inherit his criminal empire. That means that Hun's loyalty to the Shredder was, in a way, his way of living his darker instincts through him. The Shredder may have been a projection of his shadow self. This is just my interpretation, but considering how Hun went on to become his version of the Shredder, it reinforces that all he wanted was to be able to do the things he did. On the other hand, Shredder, who was looking for control and order, favored Hun more than any other henchman because of his loyalty and strength, which were two essential qualities that worked well with his role. These are my Jungian interpretations of their relationship. Ultimately, Hun represents one of the many significant additions the 2003 cartoon made to the franchise. I'll explore the other versions of Hun in upcoming videos, including the Mirage Comics adaptation. So what are your thoughts on Hun's motivations? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.